Hello, I'm Cat, and welcome back to our second channel video. So I'll freely admit right now that one of my weirder hobbies and interests has to be flying. I love airports, I love the whole world of aviation, and although sadly I won't be visiting too many airports in person anytime too soon, I figured it'd be kind of fun to show you some interesting facts regarding the distribution of airports around the world, because you might assume that there is a pretty even distribution of airports in most countries, maybe a little skewed, so certain countries have fewer, certain countries have more, but interestingly enough, if you look at the World Factbook distribution of airports, according to airports or airfields that are recognizable from the air with some form of runway, you can see how the United States not only has the most airports in the world, but they have more than 3 times the airports of the second country, which is pretty wild by itself, but they actually also have about 40% of the world's airports overall, because even if we take the 18th highest country, my own, the United Kingdom, we have 460 airports, meaning the US has 25 times as many airports as the UK, despite having only 5 times higher population. And obviously the largest country in the world by land area, in case that's going to be the big differentiator. Russia, of course, has a 10th as many airports, despite being a larger country. So the US is really interesting in that it has so many airports. Actually, just for fun here, per capita, the one that really shocked me was Paraguay, which as you can see has 800-ish airports, despite having only 7 million people, which means there are more than one airport for every 10,000 people in Paraguay. So yeah, fun fact, if you want to fly around Paraguay, apparently a pretty easy thing to do. But yeah, leaving that note aside, the US is of course a very connected country. Every time that I've been there, I've noticed that even though sometimes it's wildly expensive to fly, I mean, it's clearly not the primary option for a lot of people, you can get from pretty much any point in the country to pretty much any other point with a stop in between. Sometimes 2 stops for the really niche airports on both ends. But yeah, for the most part, you can fly to anywhere you want, to pretty much anywhere you want within the continental United States, and even out to Alaska and Hawaii. It's pretty crazy when you really start to think about it. And as a result, if I show you this map right here, you might not be shocked to learn that actually every single United States state, all of the 50, has a commercialized airport with air service. I mean, it's obvious, except, but we'll get to that in a second. But as you can see, like, it's obvious for Alaska and Hawaii. That's their lifeline. I mean, you can take boats there, but they're going to be super slow. So these ones need planes. And obviously for like Texas and California, you need it within the states themselves. But then you might be surprised to learn that, like, oh yeah, even Rhode Island, the smallest state, it's got itself some commercial air service. You might be surprised to see that, like, yep, Vermont, New Hampshire, every single state has commercial air service, with one exception being Delaware, as you can see right here. So yeah, also by the way, Rhode Island's actually great because I forgot to stick it in. I forgot Rhode Island while coloring this map. That just goes to show something, huh? But yeah, no, even though Rhode Island is the state a lot of people forget, Delaware is the only state with no commercial airline service. 49 of the 50 states have at least one airport with regular commercial service that you can just hop on yourself without needing to own a plane, and the only one that doesn't is Delaware. And it's a really interesting story as to why they don't, because if you dive into it, you realize that they actually, they used to have a bunch of flights of different airlines that no longer exist, like, oh yeah, Eastern Airlines used to fly with them, and also TWA, that's kind of cool, they had their first flight there, but actually they've continuously gone in and out of having airlines. So Delaware didn't have any scheduled flights from 1993 to 1998, 2000 to 2006, 2008 to 2013, and since April 2015. Although, just as a fun little thing, Frontier is going to be launching flights from Wilmington, Newcastle Airport, down to Orlando, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, the sole destination will be Orlando. And although you could really argue that, like, just being able to go to Florida doesn't count as a real destination, you can see how the destination map, which every airport has, by the way, this is one of the cool things Wikipedia does that you can not really find easily elsewhere. But yeah, you can see the destination map and be like, yeah, look at all the places we can go from Delaware. Wait, behind me, look at all the places we can go from Delaware. There we go, I did it. We can go to all these places. It's so exciting as of November, because obviously it got delayed because of things happening. You know, the big event that's happening, you know the big one. So yeah, that's an interesting thing that Frontier is going to be bringing to Delaware, although it's actually crazy expensive for a low-cost airline, like $158 as a base fare. But again, being the only airline serving the entire state allows you to do that. But in case you're curious as to, like, wait, so America, which has let's repeat this one, 13,513 airports, doesn't have them perfectly evenly distributed between states, even when you base it on, like, land area. And the simple reason as to why is because Delaware does have airports. I mean, I just showed you Wilmington Airport. There are other airports in the state, but the truth is the state doesn't really need its own airports, given how many big airports are nearby. I mean, Washington, D.C. obviously has Ronald Reagan Airport, which is kind of big, but it also has another one. It's called like BWI Impel. I forget what it's actually named after, but basically there is another airport for Washington. Baltimore has its own airport, and way more importantly, Philadelphia has its own airport, which has always kind of defeated the point of Wilmington having its own, because Wilmington is the biggest city in Delaware, right next to, by the way, Pennsylvania, and you can see how, like, okay, if we want to go from Philadelphia over to, Wilmington, how long is it going to take? 20 minutes by train, although by car it's like 37 minutes. But if you're going to Philadelphia Airport, how long is that going to take? It's got to be a real long time, right? No, it's 23 minutes. Like, the truth is, given that you're already driving to get to, statistically at least in America, domestic flights, people drive to them, right? I think that's how Americans do it. Weird thing compared to the rest of the world. But leave that to the side and say, yeah, so statistically you're driving to the airport, why not just drive an extra 10 minutes to go to a major international airport? You know, like, even this one flight that's going to be able to go to Orlando, right, which is so convenient. You know, there are flights from Philadelphia to Orlando. I can tell you without looking that one up. Fact check me if you want, because I know that is factually correct, given Philadelphia is one of the major hubs in America. Basically, what I'm trying to say right here is there's very little point for most of the population to need an airport. But as you can see, like, if you look at the rest of Delaware and you look at the population, which I'll show you on screen right now just to be fun, if you look at the way it's distributed throughout the state, you can see how most of the population is very close to the major airports of these three cities. And if you are in the south of that, kind of place, you can see how, like, actually, for the most part, it's not a huge population to try and serve with an airport. And even then, the population that lives close to Lewes, I don't actually know how it's said. I know it's different to the British town of the same name. But if you live over here, you can actually get to Atlantic City Airport as well. Basically, because the United States are not sovereign nations with borders that are hard to cross, because they are just things you can friendlily cross at will, it is very easy for Delaware residents, all slightly over 1 million of them, to get to the... actually, I think it's like slightly less than 1 million Delaware residents, off the top of my head. It's all easy for them to get to another airport, and as a result, it just does not, as the 49th largest state, not the second smallest, 49th largest, as the 49th largest state, they just don't really need an airport. So, because, again, like, even though a lot of states put, like, entire countries to shame, I mean, Alaska is bigger than most European nations, for instance. Despite that, like, obviously Alaska needs airports to get around within the state and to get from it to other states that are even further away than Alaska's size to itself. But Delaware is actually a pretty reasonably sized place. I can tell you a fun fact that you've probably seen from the third channel, but I didn't drive, but I was with someone who did drive across it. Actually, wait, fun fact, I've got a friend who lives in New Jersey, and for the first time in their life, they had to pump their own gas. That's how you call it in America, right? Because we were driving through, like, Dover and it ran out of thing. And, like, in New Jersey, you're not allowed to. They have to do it for you. So I got to pump gas for the first time because they didn't know how. Fun fact. Sorry for calling you out, Kit Kats. She probably won't watch this, it's fine. So anyway, there's a fun Delaware fact for you. But let's not talk about Delaware all day, because obviously you might be wondering, like, why did you focus on US states without an airport? Surely what would be interesting is to learn which countries don't have an airport, and obviously very few don't. Most countries have a few airports. Even the really tiny countries like Qatar has one mega airport, but it still has 5 other airports. Even like pretty tiny countries you'd expect, like Hong Kong has 2 airports. One of them is barely operational, but it still has 2. Luxembourg has 2 airports. Again, lots of countries you'd expect to be very low down on the list still have an airport. Malta is one of the smallest countries in the world. It's even called a microstate sometimes, and it has its own airport. So which countries do not have an airport? So, I mean, I've made a video about this one before because I was in Andorra and I was like, it's funny, I couldn't fly in here. But just to kind of give you the brief rundown, there are 5 countries in the world that don't have airports, sort of. So there's 5 countries, if we look at this list of sovereign states without airports. They're the 5 microstates of Europe, if you exclude Malta, because it's only sometimes a microstate. Andorra, Liechtenstein, Monaco, San Marino, and the Vatican City. All 5 have a heliport, but none of them have a international airport, or even just an airport of any form. And it's worth noting that Monaco and the Vatican City physically can't have one. Like, it's physically impossible to get an airport into the Vatican City because it's 0.44 kilometer squares, and you need more than that for an airport, let alone the fact that it's like again, this is just not a big enough country for an airport. But the Vatican City is barely a country. But interestingly enough, Monaco is also not big enough for an airport. If we if we take the example of like Nice, a pretty reasonably sized airport, but it's a regional airport. It's not a major international hub. If we take the Nice airport and we just like measure their runway as an example, you can see how even at this airport, which I don't think can handle the biggest aircraft in the world, maybe it can. You can fact check in that one. It's 3¼ kilometers long, and again, you get longer runways than that, but that's just a pretty decent length for a runway. You can see how if you wanted to build that in Monaco, you would be using a little bit of French land. Wait, I reckon if you really stretch it and go across the country like that, yeah, you can barely fit a airport within the space of Monaco, ignoring the fact that you'd need to borrow France's airspace to make that happen. They could theoretically demolish the entire country and build an airport there, or build a runway across all of it, and then have some facilities here and like have the rest of it be there. But in reality, if Monaco wants an airport, it has to build one by the sea, and they have limited land reclamation abilities, because they basically, every time they reclaim land, it's kind of like it's kind of making themselves bigger at France's expense. So whole point we could make right there. But Monaco cannot have an airport, and therefore, because it's very wealthy, they've got a heliport instead, which is a whole fun thing that you can learn about if you'd really like to, or maybe you can not learn about it. That's your decision, isn't it? But this video is going to move on from the fact that there are 5 countries in Europe with no airport, and they're the 5 countries in the world without an airport as well, except this is the fun thing about making these videos about countries, right? Everything eventually comes back to geopolitics and comes back to the not just like how a country exists or doesn't, but rather how countries perceive that country to exist or not. So even though there are 5 countries that don't have an airport, it gets way more complex when you start to list countries that don't. So if you try to Google how many countries don't have an airport, you'll find 2 answers. The official answer is 5, and depending on who you sympathize in the Israel and Palestine thing, which we're not talking about here. Don't leave a comment about it, you idiot. There's always someone who's like, you know, this airport video, I'm going to talk about Zionism or about, I don't know what words to use, but they're like, you know, the Middle East, it exists. It's separate to this video, okay? But, minorly related, the Gaza Strip does not own its own airspace anymore. Like the West Bank, which is part of the Palestine split-in territories, which are part of Israel right now for whatever reasons, does have some airports, but the Gaza Strip had its airport destroyed, and their airspace belongs to Israel for whatever reasons. Anyway, basically, so if you think Palestine is a sovereign nation, then there is a 6th country, but because it gets complex, it's like, is Palestine real? And you have to bring up the whole like debate about, you know, religion in the Middle East, and it's like, I just want to talk about airports. Which countries don't have airports? And that's why the answer is 5, sort of 6. But then if you're going to say that, you know, a country that some people don't think is a country counts, you know, like bits under the control of the locals, then you have to start being like, well, if that counts, right, well, how about some other, you know, interesting examples? Like, for instance, did you know Armenia and Azerbaijan, they have a very weird situation where, like, this is Azerbaijan right here, like, kind of separated from the rest of itself, and also this bit of Armenia right here is kind of under the control of a separate republic that's very much Armenian friendly. Also, look, there's a bit of Azerbaijan inside of Armenia, and a little bit of Armenia inside of Azerbaijan. This isn't just Google Maps, this is the craziness of the situation that happens over here. But anyway, so there is, basically, let's keep things simple. Here is Armenia, here's Azerbaijan, here is the Republic of Artsakh. I should have looked into how you say it before this. Artsakh. So this is the Republic of Artsakh, as we're going to be calling it from now on, just to annoy people who love perfect pronunciation. As you can see, there is this country that this thing that Azerbaijan claims as theirs, but they claim to be independent, and Armenia supports that claim, some amounts at least. And so therefore, there's an airport there, and what happens of the airport? You might be wondering. Well, it's a little bit complex, because if we look at it's called the Stepanakert Airport. They tried to like make one for passenger flights. They tried to have regular passenger service, etc. Except things got a little bit weird, to say the least, because of the whole idea that like they tried to make regular flight service to Yerevan and Armenia to like boost the thing there, but I think it was like, yeah, Azerbaijan's Civil Aviation Administration warned that according to aviation laws, they're not going to be authorized and they may be shot down. And basically, it never opened because there's a lot of like sanctions and problems that other countries were like, hey, just don't do this. It's a violation of international law. But they did build the entire airport with passenger facilities and everything. It was looking real nice, huh? It's actually not that nice. It's nice for an airport in an unrecognized country, in my opinion. Speaking of airports in unrecognized countries, Transnistria, the weird region between Moldova and Ukraine that is sort of its own country, but also not really, also does not have an airport, mostly because of its shape. Again, it's a very niche, weirdly shaped country that is not really recognized, and also is a whole touchy subject, and also a very Cyrillic-y, and very Russian influenced. We'll leave that one to the side. Well, I love talking about it every time because we can be like, hey, did you know that in Tiraspol, the largest city in there's a Lenin statue? I always forget. Wait, there's a monument to Soronov here. Let's go to that instead. Rather than the Lenin statue, let's just go to the Soronov monument. Oh, isn't this nice? They've got a tank. That's beautiful. Don't you love that? They've even got a nice little Russian flag up. Isn't this place nice? Don't you wish you could visit Transnistria? Well, you're going to have to go into a neighboring country, and you're going to have to get the bus in, which is going to be a whole thing. Actually, wait. That's the whole thing going on here. Let's see if there's anything else we can quickly go. Victory Park. Don't you want to celebrate the victory that this nation achieves? You do, and you want to celebrate that by going in, but not with the airport. And finally, it's worth mentioning, so this gets really complex, but Georgia has two countries sort of within it. Neither of these two countries are recognized. This is South Ossetia, this is Abkhazia, and and they are two separate countries that exist inside of Georgia that Georgia does not think are countries, and the international community is on Georgia's side, but Russia says, you know what? We disagree with that, and we provide the forces to make that happen. So that's why this map is like the area is controlled by a South Ossetian government, not by Georgia, and this is Abkhazia, not controlled by Georgia. So interesting enough, while I was just looking into them, South Ossetia has an airport, but it had its airport destroyed, which is kind of interesting. So that's a whole thing. And the Abkhazia airport is not allowed to be used for international flights. Same kind of thing as before, where like, you know what, they have an airport, but also you can't carry out international flights from occupied territory, and as a result, there is not going to be any flights in and out of those places. So again, if you want to visit either of these places, you have to go via Georgia, which is a bit awkward, but that's a whole fun story for another day. Actually, just as a fun little story right here, because like I said, there's two territories inside of Georgia. Just as, this is kind of shocking to me, the South Ossetia, despite being part of Georgia, which is largely a European country, also sort of not in Europe, right? But interesting enough, they got their first cases of coronavirus in May. It was, they were corona-free until May the 6th, which is kind of shocking if you ask me, but that's just a side note that came up while looking into this video. So, yeah, did you know, fun facts of Toycat, there are lots of places in the world you can't go directly via plane. It's the fastest form of transport we have as humans that is readily available yet, but it still doesn't cover the entire world, and it still doesn't even cover the entire country, which happens to have most of the airports, as you can see. Because, the real deal about airports is not just where can you build one, obviously impractical to build one in Monaco, despite, because of the land reasons. But there's a lot more places where it's entirely practical to build an airport. I mean, wouldn't you love to have an airport on the Isle of Wight? I bet I'm going to be wrong and there's going to be an airport there now, right? But when, there's a lot of places that seem like would, should have an airport. They have all the size for it. Let's pick on a count. Corby? No one likes Corby. You want to go to... They actually have an airfield nearby. It's not got commercial service, though. And the reason for that, the reason this is a amateur airfield, and maybe formerly RAF, I don't know the story behind, honestly, Corby's airfield. But what I can tell you is that to have a airport somewhere, you need to have a lot of demand, because planes need to be pretty full to generate, a profit. The average load factor for a profitable flight is in the 90s%, if you want to make good money, and as a result, you can't, even though an airport might fit on this Hambleton Island right here, it's not a great idea to have one for the whole of the 10 people who maybe will live here. Let's look at them actually. Actually, there's a little town here. Maybe it's 100, but 100 people does not an airport make, because you need to have a lot of people going in and out regularly. You need tourists, you need business people, and you need people who are getting essential transportation to get around the place.